This meeting is now being recorded.
All right, well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining from so many different places. My name is Rainey Chang. I'm with the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves. And thank you for joining today's webinar on data management at Regional Testing and Knowledge Centers. Before we get started, I want to just give a little overview of the webinar system if this is your first time joining. In order to hear the audio, you'll have to follow the instructions that I put into the chat. Of course, if you can hear me saying this, you've already set up things properly, but hopefully the others can join in as well based on the instructions in the chat window. Speaking of the chat window, this is where we can have a lot of discussion, so if during the presentations, introductory presentations, you have thoughts or suggestions or comments, please enter them into the chat window. I think we have a small enough number of participants in order to have a pretty good conversation here. So we'll plan to keep everyone muted during the presentations, and then after the presentations, we will unmute everyone and then use the chat window, and hopefully we can have some good discussion on some of the issues that we'll be raising here. So the goals of today's webinar are to have everyone hear about some of the ongoing efforts that are focused on data management. I think we want to discuss ways to streamline the data management process and then have everyone share the challenges that they're facing and the ideas and the solutions that they're coming up with. This is going to be a long-term process. It's got many pieces, and so it will take time. But the goal of this webinar is to catalyze some discussion and then move some ideas forward. This builds from Jim Jetter and Seth Ebersviller's webinar there from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They gave a webinar a few months ago. That is available online. So this really builds on that discussion as well. We will have David Beritault from the GERES Biomass Energy Lab joining us. Karsten Bechtel from the CREEC Testing Center in Uganda was originally supposed to present, but he is no longer able to join. So hopefully we can have him present at a future time, along with some other presenters related to this issue. So the audience for this webinar is really the global network and the global consortium of regional testing and knowledge centers. You can see the map here on this slide to give you a sense of really how spread out and in how many different places people are working, including lab and field across multiple continents. And of course, people are collaborating together as well. For people who are not at regional testing and knowledge centers, of course, you're welcome to join, and I'm glad you're interested in this topic, and it would be great to have your input as well. For a little bit of background, for people who are not at a regional testing and knowledge center, to give you an idea of some of the standards and testing activities, we have both global and country-level activities. So we're working together among the testing experts as well as from other organizations to develop international standards for clean cook stoves and fuels, for performance, for quality, for other methodologies and indicators that can help improve clean cook stoves and fuels. We're also working together to refine and develop testing protocols, methodologies, standardize practices, provide guidelines for people who are doing testing in order to improve testing over time, improve our ability to evaluate and have confidence in those evaluations. We're also working together to improve global testing capacity and collaboration. This webinar is part of that. So we have a series of grants, webinars, and training workshops as well, so that people can share their experiences on how to improve their testing. And of course, especially related to the issue of data, another component is communicating and reporting the performance. Excuse me. So these are the four pillars, I think, of the standards and testing activities. And where does the data fit here? So the goal of the data is we're doing all this work with testing, with standards development, and that's going to result in independent data on stove performance, use, and adoption. And the data and the information is really the backbone. When the data is shared with consumers or investors and donors, it allows people to evaluate stoves, compare stoves, see what's appropriate for them, or see what options to consider. For testing results, the data is the mechanism to share results and facilitate collaboration. For manufacturers, sharing the data allows them to affirm the performance of their product and the quality, and it's also a way to encourage innovation as well. We've already seen that with the ISO International Workshop Agreement, the IWA, that sets some interim guidelines, that's already provided some motivation for manufacturers to improve components of their performance that have not been as good. The information is also a way to support researchers who are doing more advanced analyses and developing tools. And of course, for the entire sector, the information that is coming out of all of these testing efforts can help us monitor and evaluate the global activities and progress. So in order for the data to meet these needs, we need to make sure that it's reliable, that it's traceable, and that we share it. And so how we handle the data really ensures that we meet these goals of reliability, traceability, and sharing. There are separate discussions going on about testing protocols, about quality assurance. The focus of this webinar and this discussion is on the data management piece. So how do we keep track of the data? How do we go back and trace the data? How do we share it? To provide a framework for our discussion, I put together a little diagram, a schematic of the data flow for data management and sharing. I'm starting with a figure of a laboratory testing setup with a hood and ducts and a stove, and a pot is in the hood at this point. But the data issues are really going to span multiple types of testing across lab and field, different types of information as well, things like user surveys, evaluating the use of stoves. So this is meant to be a general framework. So of course, there's the data collection, and then that data gets stored in some combination of spreadsheets and databases. And then there needs to be data processing in place, data checks, data analysis, and these are the general pieces, and then we'll talk through some of the issues related to each of these components. And then, of course, for the information to be useful, we need to share it and apply it. So there are a few different ways of reporting and sharing. One, of course, with the testing organization clients. That could be proprietary, that could be public. There's also sharing among the testing center network to facilitate collaboration, to bridge lab and field testing, to ensure that results are comparable from lab to lab and from testing center to testing center. And of course, this could be anonymized if necessary. And then, oops, I went a little too far in the slides. Sorry about that. Okay, and the last piece, sorry about that, is sharing publicly when it's appropriate. Of course, some information will need to be proprietary, but for information that that manufacturers are willing to share with the public, or they agree that it can be publicly shared, we want to have a public interface for non-technical audiences. So David will be talking about, I'm going to show my cursor for a bit. David will be talking about some of his experiences for data collection, storing the information, doing the processes, the checks and the analysis, as well as some of the reporting. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is this piece, sharing with the public. And while we're talking, if there are ideas and thoughts and suggestions, please put them into the chat window so we can have the conversation ongoing before we get to the open discussion time at the end. So I hope all of you have already seen the Clean Cooking Catalog. This was, the first version was completed a couple months ago, and we're rolling that out now. We're also doing a second phase of development, and so we're interested in feedback on your experiences with this tool so far. So the Clean Cooking Catalog is a database of stoves, their characteristics and specifications, test results, a number of pieces of information that are relevant for people who need to make decisions about the stove options. And so this is meant to provide the information for the decision makers on what stoves are available, and then have some transparency and easier access to a lot of testing data that has been more buried in reports over the last few decades. So the initial version includes data that has been compiled from publicly available reports. We try to make the information traceable to the source so that you can also get the original information, know who gathered the data and reported it. But this catalog is really just the beginning. We wanted to provide a framework for organizing the information and to give access to the information. And then over the next few months, we want to improve the quantity and quality of the data that is in the Clean Cooking Catalog. So to give you an introduction to the Clean Cooking Catalog, hopefully you'll go directly and check it out yourself. But this is a screenshot to give you a sense of what's in the database. So you can view stoves by their photos, names, manufacturer information, where it's manufactured, where it has been disseminated. There's information about the stove specification, prices, as well as performance. We want to give people the information side by side so that they can balance the information based on their preferences and priorities. You can also, of course, search by keyword. You can browse by or filter the information by characteristics, price, geography, performance. We have a list of testing organizations as well. This list of testing organizations includes only the organizations who have provided information for the catalog. This is something that over time will grow so that there'll be more and more stoves, more and more testing organizations that are reporting information. And then for people who are interested, you can also examine the details of the test results. And so as I mentioned, this is something that we are looking to grow over time. So what we have, what we are currently in the process of developing is a more standardized template as well as an automated data process to facilitate data sharing. So what we would like to have is data collection into some type of standardized spreadsheet and database. This would be based on the IWA reporting template that we've set up. You saw in Jim and Seth's presentation, if you saw their webinar, that they included a reporting form like this as part of the spreadsheet. And so having that kind of setup will enable a more automated process to upload the information into the public database. Of course, we would have checks on the database, and then it becomes available, and then so basically what we would like to do is have as few extra steps as possible. You don't need to copy information over from one place to the next to minimize the errors in sharing the data. And so we have a team working on the testing spreadsheets that the Alliance maintains. That will be the standard format that we will enforce in having data be shared with the catalog. And a question just came in from Jim Jitter: will the Alliance develop and maintain the catalog indefinitely? I think this is a resource that will live on. I think what we've heard so far is that this is something that people have been looking for a long time, and we think that this addresses a need that we're hearing from a lot of different audiences and different sources. So we do want to make sure that the catalog is continuously developed and maintained, whether it's maintained by the Alliance or someone else. That, you know, the future is hard to predict, but we will make sure that the catalog will be a resource that lives on. That's why we're working on setting up maintenance components and then also updating components that can facilitate that process. I also want to briefly mention an effort that has been led by Infosys. So Infosys has been partnering with the Alliance to provide some of their input and expertise based on their information and data management system experience. Unfortunately, they weren't able to join today's webinar, but we will schedule a webinar in the future so that we can, as a community, hear about their results and hear their recommendations. I do know that some of you have already talked with the Infosys team, and so what they've done is a series of stakeholder interviews. They've evaluated people's data management processes based on these interviews. What are best practices? What are challenging points that are hurdles? And then they developed a list of recommendations. So we'd like to schedule a webinar in the future for people to get introduced to their recommendations, give feedback on the recommendations. And so the outputs are on, this is an Infosys slide here. The outputs are on the right. They've mapped out the issues into an issue tree. They've evaluated some of the potential options and then mapped out a roadmap for some of the pieces that we can think through for what individual testing organizations can do, and then what, as a global network and consortium of testing organizations, what we can do. So at this point, we'll take any questions about this initial introduction on laying out the framework for data management, that public interface, that's the data, the Clean Cooking Catalog, and then a bit of an introduction to the Infosys recommendations, which we'll hear more about later. So are there any questions about these initial introductory thoughts. While the questions are coming in, David, I'm going to switch the presentation controls to you. You should be unmuted now, and then we'll switch to your slides. All right, so we'll turn it over to David Beritault. He is the head of the GERES Biomass Energy Laboratory in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. A number of us had the chance to visit the lab when we had the Clean Cooking Forum back in March, but I don't think we had a chance to talk about some of the developments that they are working on related to data management. And so I think the reason why I thought David and Karsten, who unfortunately wasn't able to join, they've been doing testing for a while. They're generating some data, and they're seeing some of the challenges as they get more and more data. How do you handle that information, especially as it grows? So I think for a lot of the testing centers that are in an earlier stage of development, the example from the GERES lab are going to be quite useful, and then hopefully for labs with more experience with data management, they can share their input advice for GERES as well. Before I turn it over to David, I see there's a question from Jim. When will the Infosys evaluation be available? The slides are available now, but they're a little bit dense, so I'd like to have them walk through the slides with us during the webinar. So we're currently working on scheduling a time for a webinar and should be able to send that invitation as soon as the date is finalized, but hopefully before the end of the year. So, please keep the questions coming. If we don't address them during the presentation, we can address them in the discussion at the end. So at this point, I'm going to mute myself and then turn it over to David.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar, and thanks to Rainy and the Alliance for hosting it. My name is David Beritault, and I'm working with GERES Cambodia. I'm in charge of the GERES Biomass Energy Laboratory in Phnom Penh. So I'm going to present our data management process with a focus on stuff testing. If you have any question or comment during or after the presentation, I will do my best to answer it. So I will start by presenting quickly GERES organization and giving you an introduction to GBEL. I will continue the presentation with the presentation of GBEL data flow regarding stuff testing. Then I will share with you our challenges on data management, processes we have implemented so far to improve it, our key priorities for the next years, and our recommendation to other labs. So GERES means Group for the Environment, Renewable Energy and Solidarity. It is a French non-governmental organization created after the First Oil Crisis in 1976. We are specializing in the implementation of efficient energy solutions adapted to developing countries to improve the living conditions of their inhabitants. GERES is composed of around 200 staff with around 50 projects in France and a dozen of developing countries. In Cambodia, we are working since 1994 with a focus on biomass energy supply and use. You may know our success story, the new Lao stove, an improved charcoal burning stove that we have been disseminated since the last 10 years. So the Biomass Energy Laboratory was set up in 2009 in Phnom Penh in partnership with the Institute of Standards of Cambodia and the Ministry of Industry, Mine and Energy. With no testing facility in the country, CBEL was created to answer the need for scientific analysis on biomass equipment and fuel. We are conducting analysis on biomass fuel, testing of ceramic material and stove at the laboratory and in the field. We are also providing support in the region with partners in Laos, LIRE, the Lao Institute for Renewable Energy, and SNV, the Netherlands Development Organization in Laos and Vietnam. And we are extending our activities in Myanmar and Indonesia. So we are 8 people working at the laboratory, 4 on laboratory testing and 4 on field testing. Our testing services include fuel analysis with moisture content, proximate analysis, which is the determination of hash content and volatile matter in charcoal, and the calculation of its fixed carbon content. And we are just starting to provide calorific value analysis. We are testing stove with different testing protocols. The adapted water burning test, developed by GERES to be more representative of local cooking habits. The water boiling test with emission of measurement of PM2.5, CO and CO2. And we are also conducting kitchen performance tests in the field. With the focus on locally made stove, we have also been working on ceramic material testing with the determination of porosity, mechanical resistance, drying shrinkage and sintering temperature. The temperature at which the clay material become mature. So this is a chart describing our data flow process with a focus on stove testing. I will detail the different steps in the next slides. We are always starting with the determination of what we call pre-testing data, which are data needed to prepare the test. We are then testing the stove and collecting the raw data, and then processing them until we reach a condition of statistical validity. Once it is achieved, we are writing a testing report describing the testing condition and discussing the result, and finally storing all the data, hard and soft copies. So pre-testing data is the data needed to prepare the test. It includes data on testing equipment, such as the checkup of the good state of operation of the equipment. This is the case for equipment we can't calibrate in-house. For example, we are performing two-point testing of thermometers at 0 degrees C and 100 degrees C. When possible, we are performing calibration as we do for scale, and soon the determination of calibration constant for emission measurement equipment. All these data are then compiled in a maintenance and calibration database. We are also testing fuel with the determination of the moisture content and soon the calorific value for each batch of fuel we are purchasing for testing. And these data are also compiled in a testing fuel database. Finally, we are performing practice tests of the stove. It usually takes us 1 to 3 runs to get used to the stove operation. And we are creating 2 folders, one for all hard documents and one for all soft documents. So we are then starting to test the stove. It usually takes us 3 to 5 runs to achieve the condition of statistical validity. For each run, we get one data collection sheet where times and weights are recorded. We are also recorded the name of the stove, the run number, the testing fuel, and the testing equipment. We are also trying to describe as much as possible any particular event that might happen during this. When measuring emission during the test, we also get a comma-separated value file, which is specific to our emission testing equipment. For your information, we are using the laboratory emission measurement system, the LEMS, from our Beritault Research Center. So once we get the raw data, we are processing them using Microsoft Excel. We are using the processing sheet specific to the LEMS, where we are entering the data of the data collection sheet and importing the CSV file. So once processed, testing results of each run are transferred to a summary sheet in order to calculate coefficient of variation. We are considering a series of runs valid when variation on fuel use is 10% or less, and variation of CO and PM emissions are 25% or less. When we reach the statistical validity, we are then writing a testing report, which includes a description of the test, the purpose, the stove tested, the fuel used, and the testing condition as detailed as possible. Then there is the summary of the testing result with a discussion on the result obtained, and the detailed testing results are included in the appendix of the testing report. Finally, all the data are stored in a specific location. Soft files are saved on the testing folder, which include the raw data, the process data, the summary sheet, and the testing report. And we are naming the folder with the years, the client name, and the stove name. All hard documents are stored in an archive folder with the same naming used for this folder. We are also filling in a simple database to make references to the test performed, and it includes the date, the stove name, the testing report used, the testing protocol used, the type of testing fuel and its code, the tester name, a brief description of the purpose of the test, and the name of the folder where all the data related to the test are stored. So this is our data flow process. I'm now going to share with you the challenges. Since the laboratory has been running, we have faced several challenges, such as the documentation of testing conditions along with the testing result, in order to be able to compare testing results and or to understand the differences in the result obtained. It is important to detail as much as possible the testing condition. For example, we are using locally available fuel, which is not standard from time to time. It is already very good when the batch we purchase have the same quality. It happened to us by the past to have inexplicable testing results with the same stove supposedly tested in the same conditions, until we find out that testing fuel was different. That is why now we are coding each testing fuel batch we are purchasing and conducting fuel analysis. The other challenges is the high number of documents, hard and soft, per stove, per test. Some of them are quite large, such as the emission processing file, which are around 15 megabytes per run. And it is important to have all of them available in a specific location and to be able to find them easily. We are relying on IT equipment for the storage of the data, and crashes or accidents can happen. And it is important to have backup of data. Finally, staff turnover is also a challenge for us. So we have to make sure that all the data are kept at the center and remain available for new staff. So in order to face these challenges, we have started to implement some improvement. We are recording as much information as we can on data collection form. We are not writing pages, but we try to detail the testing condition and to report any particular event that might happen during the test. All this information are documented in the testing report. We have created a simple database to make reference to each test conducted at the lab and includes the main testing condition. So it makes it easier to find out previous testing results or to check if a test has already been conducted in the past. All data are saved on the server with regular backup, and the data management process is being documented so that every staff is following it. Regarding the key priorities over the coming years, we are going to continue the improvement of our data management system and its documentation. We want to work on the development of checklists to make sure that all the data, hard and soft, are available and at the correct location. And to participate in the development of a real database, including main testing results, to facilitate data sharing. And we are counting on the support of the Alliance and Infosys for this matter. As a general recommendation towards the testing lab, I would say that the data management plan is essential to ensure that data are well managed in the present and remain available in the future. And that detailed testing condition should be reported along with testing results. Finally, I have to say that I was a bit reluctant to do this presentation as I have the feeling our process is far from being a model. However, it is important that we share procedure and experiences together. It might not be perfect, but hopefully it can help others, and ideas and recommendations are welcome from you all to improve it further. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question or remark, I will try to answer it now, or you can send it to me later.
Thank you, David, for that. And your comments about being initially reluctant, hopefully, I'm glad you did that, and I think it's very useful to hear your thought process, the challenges that you guys faced, and then what you did to address those challenges. So I think this is a perfect presentation for facilitating discussion and how to share ideas about these issues. There's a question for Jim. When you report final results, how much data do you think should be included, raw data too?
Well, for the moment, we are only using the summary of testing results, processing sheet. But what I think is important is to have as much detail on the testing condition.
Yeah, and I think Jim's question sounds like it's probably for the whole group too as well. So if people have thoughts on Jim's question about how much data should be shared in the report, please chime in. In terms of our thinking about data sharing from the Alliance and around the catalog, we're thinking that multiple levels of detail would be useful to different audiences. So for some people, the tiers of performance, that's all they're going to look at, unfortunately, or fortunately. Well, I shouldn't make judgments from that. But in other cases, people might be interested in the specific values of the indicators. Some people might be interested in the raw data when people are comfortable sharing that. And so we want to set things up so that, for example, the raw data could be attached as a file and that the summary data is organized and presented as part of the interface. And then I think David's point about sharing the test conditions are very important. So one of the next steps for us in thinking about sharing the data and standardizing the format is that we have a little bit more standardization for reporting things like test conditions. And then so when we display test results in that standardized way through the catalog, that we can also share information about the condition. Other thoughts or ideas about Jim's question about how much data should be included, for which audiences should the raw data be included? What I'm going to do now is unmute everyone, and I'm going to ask that everyone just mute themselves. If you would like to speak, just unmute yourself and speak. I think we have an appropriate number of people for having a
All guests have been muted.
Here.
All guests have been unmuted.
All right, so it may take a couple of seconds for everyone to mute yourself if you're not speaking. Please do that so that we can have a little bit clearer audio. Thank you. And then if you would like to speak, just unmute yourself and chime right in. So any other thoughts or recommendations on Jim's question for discussion? When you report final results, how much data do you think should be included? And while people ponder that, we also have another question. How to calibrate your instruments and how often? That's a question maybe David, you can handle that, and others can talk about their calibration plans.
Yeah. So until now, I mean, on the emission testing equipment, we were sending them back to a Provetro Research Center once a year because we could not do it more often. And in the next coming weeks, we are going to have calibration gases in-house. I don't think we will be able to do it every day, as the discussion were done at the US EPA discussion. But we will try to fix the period that is possible for us.
And can others talk about how often they calibrate their experiments and instruments, and then how often or how do you keep track and have a record of the calibration?
Yeah, this is Tim Longwell speaking from Honduras. Good morning, and thanks for involving me in this call. I think this calibration issue is extremely important. I know that David probably has the same issue in terms of, as is probably a lot of other folks, getting the calibers. It turns out that we're not able to find them in country, but we'll have to purchase them either through Costa Rica or Mexico. And so this issue of how often are we going to be calibrating in order to meet the minimum requirements of the ISO is something that definitely needs to be addressed in much more detail. Much like David, we've been sending in our equipment yearly to Approvator for calibration, but Mike recently commented, sent me an email saying that they're trying to work on a new methodology where we'll be able to take out the CO sensor, for example, send it back to them, and they'll be able to do it much more easily than taking the entire box back to Approvator every year. So perhaps have the opportunity to be a more periodic calibration done there at operation.
And then we also heard when we visited for the last RTKC training workshop hosted at EPA in North Carolina, we also heard about their calibration and quality assurance plan. We do have a video of that presentation and discussion that is being processed, and we hope to be able to post that soon. But I see Jim and Seth are on. Can you guys maybe speak a little bit about what your calibration strategy is?
Yeah, we calibrate at the beginning and end of every day, but we go through quite a lot of calibration gas, and it is expensive to do it that way. And I don't think that less often would probably still be okay, but just the capability to check the instruments is important. And I think every center will probably need to work out a strategy for how often it needs to be done. By keeping good records, you can see how long it takes for things to drift off, and then you can get an idea about how often you need to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think as people get more up and running with the testing and they can start to share their experiences, how are they deciding how often to calibrate? What is that based on? What are their experiences? I think that will be quite useful. And over the next year or so, it would be great to organize some type of round-robin testing. We want to have some of those discussions for planning that out, and so that could be a component of the round-robin testing process to help people figure out what kind of calibration plan they'll need.
Yeah.
So, based off of what David talked about in his presentation, are there other experiences that different testing centers have experienced, other challenges that you face that you would like to raise and discuss? Or maybe starting more from the question of how are you managing your testing data? Are there ideas that David has and his team at GERES have implemented that you think will be useful to you? All right, so no volunteers for sharing their experiences. Any other questions for David or for any of the information that I talked about? Another thing that I would like, while we do have this webinar, I'm going to switch to the other presentation just for now. I also am interested in hearing people's opinions about the process for sharing information with this public database, with the Clean Cooking Catalog. So what are your recommendations or concerns for this type of sharing mechanism so that as we develop and finalize the template, that we have something that is going to work for the testing organizations that are producing the data and also provide the right type of information? while you guys are pondering that question, we do have one more question, sounds like for David. What about the fuel? How often do you test the calorific value?
Yeah, so we have just received the equipment now. We are going to find out the number of tests we have to do to have a representative value for the batch we are using. This is not defined yet.
So it sounds like no comments or recommendations on facilitating a data sharing process, but we'll keep everyone up to date on how that process is developing so that you can comment on specific templates or specific mechanisms for sharing information.
Yeah, Rainey, I've got another question for David, and that is in regards to his pre-testing stove operation. He says that he runs it he runs the test of the stove 1 to 3 times to figure out how to best manage it. How do you, David, determine that best management or feeding of the stove?
David?
Yeah.
Do you understand my question?
Yeah, more or less. We try to select. I guess like when we are doing that way, depending on the protocol we are using for testing, we are trying to put the stove in its best condition. Does that answer your question?
Tim, are you still there?
Hello?
Does that address your question, Tim? About
the
actual operation?
Yeah, we've just found that we've had to run the stove up to 10 different times in order to find out how to get the optimal performance out of it. And that's a discussion that we've had in previous conversations with other groups.
Yeah, I think that's something to discuss and address as well as a broader group. That how do we operate the stove? What is the appropriate operation, especially if manufacturers don't specify guidelines. And I think that some of the discussions related to planning for the round-robin testing, and as we map that out, I think that's another thing to make sure it's more standardized, in addition to things like the equipment and calibrating and making sure the results are checked and reliable, that we're operating, that we have a better understanding about how each of us is operating the stoves during the test.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sorry that I always bring this up, but unless the operator, the way that the stove is fed, is really probably one of the most key components in terms of the overall performance of that stove. And so unless that's taken care of, all the emissions data is questionable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a few ongoing efforts as well to get a better sense of testing a range of operating conditions, especially based on what we're seeing from how stoves are used in homes.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
other questions or comments?
Rainey, this is Jim.
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Okay, a comment was made before about the difficulty of getting calibration gases in some countries, and this is an idea that maybe we can talk about more at the upcoming workshop in Honduras. But something new that we've started doing, and this is actually an idea that Seth Ebersbiller had here that's been very helpful to us. We are using a cylinder of 100% carbon dioxide, which I think is readily available in all countries because it does not have to be research grade. It's just, CO2 is used for pressurizing soda fountains and for lots of purposes. So we're using these very inexpensive cylinders of carbon dioxide, and then we're injecting it at a known flow rate into our hood. And that gives us an overall check on our air velocity measurement. We can do a calculation to calculate what the carbon dioxide concentration should be in the dilution tunnel. And then we compare that, with what we're actually measuring, and it's really a good overall QA check. So, maybe we can talk, and that's assuming that you have the capability to measure carbon dioxide. But I think the LEM system does have that capability. So then, if you know your carbon dioxide measurement is right, then that gives you some assurance that your other measurements are in the ballpark too. I mean, there still would be a need to calibrate your carbon monoxide, your CO sensor, and periodically. But the carbon dioxide might be a low-cost alternative that might be practical for regional testing centers. So, and again, I want to give Seth Ebersviller credit for this idea. I think it might be very useful to some of the centers.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Seth and Jim. Thanks for sharing that. I think what we should do is revisit the whole calibration and quality assurance topic. We'll definitely cover it and discuss it in Honduras. I mentioned we have the video that, I apologize for the delay on our end for processing the video, but we'll have the presentations and the overview of the quality assurance plan from EPA, and then I think that would be great to stimulate discussion on some of the challenges that people are facing with calibration and other types of maintenance and quality assurance. So both at future webinars and then during the Honduras training meeting.
Okay, great. And thanks a lot to David for this great presentation. It looks like you really have a very logical process that you're using, and you have a really nice laboratory, and thanks for sharing this good information with us.
Right, it looks like the questions have, we don't have any more questions coming in, so, echoing Jim, thanks, David, and thanks to all the participants for listening and asking questions and commenting. As I mentioned, this is something that will continue. A number of issues were raised that will still need further discussion and work, so I'm sure we'll be reconvening in the future to work out a number of these issues.
Thanks, Randy.
Great, and the participants, you know how to reach me or David or anyone else on this call, so hopefully we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much, everyone.